Hey, it's Michael here with Heavy Hockey Network. We're going to do a just a little trade deadline discussion today. This is kind of on the spur of the moment. We Oilers have been a little bit active up into the trade deadline. Not as active as some people would like, as active as some people would care to like, and yeah, lots of different opinions out there. Anyway, we thought we'd talk about it. If you want, check us out at youtube.ca/heavy hockey. We're going to be there where you can join in the chat, or you join in the chat on Twitter. If you're on Twitter or Facebook at facebook.com/Oilers podcast. I've got with me to talk about what the Oilers did. We'll talk about around the league in the Pacific Division. We're not going to be at this very long. But we'll talk about what happened today as far as the NHL trade deadline. I've got Ryan Lotsberg, senior writer at heavyhockey.com. And already we got a comment in the chat. You boys know what time it is? I'm still at work. yeah. As are we. Although here on the East Coast, it's home time. It's 20 after 5. So
I mean, who works on trade deadline day? Come on.
that's right. Should be taking these days off.
It's a national holiday.
Oh man, I tell you, busy. I did it. Was it as busy as it normally is? You think? Like it didn't feel. I don't know. I mean, some big names go, but was it really like the huge splash that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the final numbers as far as how many trades actually went down today, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it was crazy. Like it was a busy week. So like
Yeah.
maybe the same amount of trades happened. It's just they got spread out over the course of the last week or so. I think that's more the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt, and of course, some big trades happened, a couple weeks ago. If you're thinking of Lindholm and Zadorov, and some of these trades, it seemed like folks were at least trying to spread out the the trade deadline this year, maybe as opposed to some years past. But that's the way it is. Let's start in our division. Okay. As far as we talked about it, just to kind of get everybody up to speed, if you don't already know, Lindholm, of course, and Zadorov went to Vancouver. That was earlier well, Zadorov, of course, was quite a while ago, but then Lindholm in January, and that's it for Vancouver. They didn't do any more trades. So really quite quiet at the deadline. I don't know if there was much they could do, but that's Vancouver. If we move next, and I'm going to save Las Vegas till last because they're the ones that made the most moves. But we go to Los Angeles again, no trades, right? So both Vancouver and LA stand pat. They like the teams they're going with, or there was nothing available to them. And then let's talk about Vegas. Vegas was active, to say the least.
Yeah, it's putting it mildly.
Yeah. Yeah. But the major trades, of course, major pickups, in these going mostly for picks, going the other way. Anthony Mantha from the Capitals, Noah Hannafin from Calgary, and then Thomas Hertl from San Jose. So some big names going there. Hertl, Hannafin, Mantha, and for the most part, nobody going the other way for Vegas, right? Some prospects. And then as far as the Edmonton Oilers go, I'd say, reasonably active as well, right? Like you get a few players. You got Stetcher on D. Pudboy comes in. Corey Perry was a key pickup. Not a trade deadline acquisition, but definitely a pickup, later in the season. And then Henrique and Sam Carrick. First, to note, I mean, I spent when I could, obviously a work day for those of us that didn't take the day off, but when I could, I was watching, all of the panelists across the NHL, TSN specifically, and Sportsnet were the two big ones. And I think everybody was amazed and surprised at what Vegas did, right, and what they were able to do. And I would suggest this is, everybody's saying what Edmonton didn't do, but Vegas is a special case, right? Not only did they have all the picks they had, but they've got some LTIR room that they get to play with that might not have been available to other teams. First, your thoughts on Vegas? Like, are they considerably better? Mildly better? What's your thoughts?
I mean, they're definitely a little bit better. I mean, the big thing is adding Noah Hannafin on defense. That makes an already strong decor even that much better. And that they're gonna. Did they extend him? I believe they extended him.
Yeah, I mean they were talking about it. I actually didn't pay attention to that, but I
Or
know
maybe
that
they're
the
just talking about it. It
conversation
hasn't
was had.
happened yet.
Yeah,
But
was had. Yeah.
but
But
that's
now you're looking at a defense that's Hannafin and Petrangelo, McNabb and Theodore, and then like Zach Whitecloud as a third line D pairing. That's pretty good,
yeah.
right? With Nicholas Hague, probably the best uh, third line D pairing in the division, at least, right?
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. It really is. I mean, if
Yeah.
the Oilers have Kulak and Cece on the third pairing, that's also pretty darn good. But I'd give the nod to Vegas there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, okay, so Vegas upgraded on defense. I'd say, is pretty good, right? Like Hannafin is having a hell of a year, career year. He's a valuable defenseman. Certainly, if you can add a top line defenseman, which we've seen in Edmonton, it's going to make a big difference on your team.
It can.
Yeah. And this team clearly, but they needed it, right? Like everybody's looking at this and, talking Vegas, Vegas, Vegas. We're talking a team that's what, 2-7-1 in their last 10. They needed to shore something up. So start on D, right? Like,
And they lost Alec Martinez too out of that group. I mean, if he comes back for the playoffs, then that makes it look even better for them.
yeah,
But Martinez, yeah, he's getting older. He's not the player he was with the Kings when he was winning cups with them, but he's still a very good player.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, nobody's going to kick him off their team. That's for sure. Last year of his contract right now on LTIR is, 36, but, a great defenseman. I think any Oilers fan would love to have him in our top six for sure. So not defense, definitely an upgrade, right? For
100%.
Vegas. Yeah. Now we go to the top half, the forwards, right? And can we agree? I mean, in net, Vegas is all right? Like
Yeah,
Aiden
Aiden
Hill's,
Hill's been giving them
yeah,
excellent hockey this year,
top
and
goalie.
obviously in the playoffs last year too. So like Aiden Hill has emerged as a legit starter for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And then now in the forward position, you still have that top line of Eichel, Barbashev, and Marchessault, but you've got Stone out, and then on the second line, what do you got? Mantha moves in there, Carlson and Stevenson, and then the third line. Well, my story. I mean, Hurdle's probably going to be on that second line,
Yeah, I was gonna say,
right?
where do you
Yeah,
have Hurdle?
yeah. I mean, so you're starting to move guys. You got Nick Roy, Amadio. I mean, you've got, pretty good top 9. Pretty good everybody, really, all the way down right down the lineup, but your top 3 lines are pretty solid, pretty good depth, and, there's some debate as to whether or not, Mark Stone comes back, right?
Right. I don't think
Um,
he's coming back this regular season.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about Vegas and their chances and how they've improved it as a team for the regular season, you've taken Mark Stone out of the lineup and you've added Anthony Mantha and Thomas Hurdle. Hurdle, yeah, given it's a terrible Sharks team that he's playing on, but he hasn't exactly been dynamite this year. And Anthony Mantha's had a bit of a resurgence, but he's inconsistent and a little bit soft, and his defensive game isn't exactly where you might want it. So like he has a lot really good tool belt. Like that shot of his is wicked. He knows how to score, but I'm not sure about his 200-foot game.
Yeah, and I think, the reason I wanna talk about this first, right, is, like, we wanna talk about, like, there's a section of the Oilers fan base that is upset that Vegas did so much and Ken Holland did what he did, right? And
Yep.
so I think it's important to establish, like, what did Vegas do, right? And, from a, um, and what did they do from a GM perspective, right? I mean, the key here, right, is Ken Holland, like, did he fail the Edmonton Oilers? Everybody, there's that 15 to 20% of the Oilers fan base that will consistently say that Ken Holland is never all in, right? Like that he's, and some of them, including folks at Heavy Hockey, are suggesting that, Ken Holland, we heard an F rating today in the chat, right? In the Heavy Hockey chat.
Yeah.
And so, I want to establish here, like, what did Vegas do? And to your point, their Stone is out. They're 2-7-1 with Stone out of the lineup, right? In the last 10. I think their record even extends as poorly beyond that. I mean, they're last in the wild card spot when they were sitting in first at one point of the season.
Yeah, they're
Uh,
about 500 ever since they had that really hot start.
that's right. Okay, so this is a team that desperately needed something, at least to replace Stone. Now, if Stone comes back, that's a whole different story. But Vegas doesn't get the opportunity to do what they did if they're not playing the LTIR game, which we're all too familiar with in the NHL, Tampa Bay, and others. Right? Like this is, let's look at this team and say, they've got Mantha and they've got Hurdle. Does this immediately make them a Stanley Cup contender? Were they a Stanley Cup contender before without them? I guess is the big question. And are they now with the additions?
I mean, defending Stanley Cup champs that didn't really make many changes to their roster year over year. It's like I think they were certainly a contender before all of this, and they've added so much. I mean, I would say that losing Stone and getting Hurdle and Mantha in the short term is probably close to a wash. And then you add Hannafin, your team got better, or you add Hannafin, lose Martinez. It's marginally better on defense. So I'd say they got a little bit better. But again, if Martinez and Stone come back, yeah, they're absolutely a Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the big question mark. Now, I mean, most of us expect them to be back in the lineup, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is, we've seen this before. By the way, I thought, a good fix to this rule or this lack of a rule might be if you go into the playoffs in LTIR that you're not allowed back in the first round.
Where you're not allowed back into LTIR in
Like
the
you're
first
not
round?
allowed back on the roster until the end of the first round.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So Stone wouldn't be allowed back until the end
Yeah.
of the first round.
No, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. We'll get there, and, I mean, the jealousy that we have is typically because we're not doing it ourselves. 'Cause
Yeah, I think
because,
a
we would
lot of the
be
frustration comes
yeah,
where because this is the 3rd year in a row that Stone has been on LTIR at the trade deadline.
yeah,
But 2022, they didn't make any trade deadline deals and they missed the playoffs. But they did use LTIR to get Jack Eichel earlier that season. So
yeah,
give or take there. Last year, all they did at the deadline was add Barbashev for Zach Dean. So that's a prospect coming out of the system. And then you're adding $2.25 million at the deadline. So, yeah, it was an impactful addition, but it wasn't Thomas Hurdle. It wasn't Noah Hannafin last year. So, yeah, they benefited from it last year, but it wasn't the crazy type of moves that we're seeing this year. So, this is the first real year where they've just gone crazy with it. And as you say, they had the LTR space to work with, and they had all the draft capital to work with. And that's because they didn't spend any draft picks at the last 2 deadlines. You look at what the Oilers have done, like even prior to this deadline, they had already spent picks in the 2025 draft.
yeah.
And this year we traded a draft pick in 2027, right? It's because we're buying at the deadline every year, and fans are upset that we're not spending more at the deadline every year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that, for those fans that think Holland had other options, I'm not sure they understand how the cap rules work and what they have in stock, right? Not to mention, like, this, I think the fact that the Oilers, didn't get Tanev has a hell of a lot to do with who they were trying to trade with, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the word on the street is that the Oilers offered more for Tanev than Dallas did,
Yeah, like all the
right?
like Pierre LeBrun, Elliot Friedman, those guys have basically all but confirmed that the Oilers offered a first round pick and CC for Tanev, right? And then some of the guys, Bob Stauffer and Frank Saravalli, were saying that the Adam Henrique deal was in place for about a month before it actually happened. Well, why didn't it happen sooner? Because the Oilers wanted to use that first round draft pick on Chris
Yeah.
Tanev, but that didn't work out. So the priority was clearly upgrading CC and getting Chris Tanev, but that didn't pan out. And that's because Calgary said no. That's not because Holland is sitting on his hands and doesn't see CC as an area of need for an upgrade, right? That was Calgary saying no to that trade.
So let's talk about Edmonton. I mean, we can talk about Vegas. They're skirting the rules a little bit. Well, they're not skirting the rules.
It's
They're playing
all
with
by the
the
book.
rules. It's all by the book. So fair. As some stranger says, if everybody starts to do that, then they'll change the rules. And I think that's true. I think that has less to do with Vegas and more to do with, like, anytime it's happened, it's been one team, right?
Chicago in
And
2015, Tampa
yeah.
Bay, right? It's
Exactly,
happened
yeah, but it's
before.
been one team, right? It hasn't been multiple teams at the deadline,
Yeah.
and I think so it's harder to pinpoint, a problem other than, a bunch of, teams that, otherwise can't, haven't been able to do that, are a little bit jealous that they haven't done that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's how it works out, but anyway, if you look at this Oilers squad, and this was the other yesterday, I said if all that Ken Holland does is, sorry, just had some stuff going on here. It's either, this is the team that got the Oilers to where they're at, right? This is the same team that's been one of the top teams in the league, has been, a quote unquote Stanley Cup contender since day one. Sorry, give me a second. I've got some background noise happening. I'm having to put it on mute, and it's kind of getting in the way. Um, Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. So this is
Yeah, I mean, it's the same group that has done so well all season long, and then Holland has added to it, right? Like Ken Holland has added to this group that I believe is the second best record in the league since we hired Chris Knobloch. It's like we're taking an already strong team and we're adding to it. Now, a lot of people are upset that Holland didn't add in the positions that they wanted Holland to add in, right? Like I was just talking about, Holland didn't upgrade Cody Ceci. Like I said, I think that was the intent. I think that's why the Henrik deal happened later, as late as it did. They wanted Tanev, and they didn't see it happening. The other option that went at this trade deadline was Sean Walker. Philly wanted a first-round pick for him, but they had to take back Ryan Johansson to make that happen. And Philly has no intention of ever dressing Ryan Johansson. Like, they put him on waivers before the trade was even announced, and Briere has come out and said that they have no plans of putting Johansson in the lineup at all. Like, he's not going to be a part of their organization. So maybe Philly might have taken a first in Cody Ceci, because like they went out and traded for Eric Johnson today, another veteran right-handed D, to fill Walker's spot. But at the end of the day, I don't think the Oilers thought that Sean Walker was enough of an upgrade over Cody Ceci to warrant spending the first round pick. And I don't know that they could have re-signed Walker next year. He wants a big deal at $5 million a year next year. I don't think the Oilers can afford that.
Yeah, that's and that's exactly it. I mean, there are so many little nuances to the trade deadline that I don't think people fully understand, right? Like this was the Oilers came into this. They had a shopping list of items that they needed. Sure, they would have loved to upgrade on D with Cody Ceci, but there's still a lot of teams in the league that would love to have Cody Ceci on their in their D pairings, right?
Yeah.
This is like the part that I'm having trouble with, and if you're listening right now, and I know some of you are on the negative side of this, of what Ken Holland was able to do, you're going to be disappointed, because I'm not. Like, I look at this team, and here's the over the past 2 seasons, arguably one of the best playoff teams in the league. Yeah, they lost, but both times they lost to the eventual Stanley Cup winner, right? There was they deserved to be in that series against Colorado. Colorado was a powerhouse. Like, they were going to run over anybody.
It was their year.
It was their year. Last year, same thing. Vegas was a powerhouse. It was their year. The Oilers have I think, though, consistently got better. I know, like, the only reason they didn't go further last year was because when they ended up playing Vegas, right? Like, they were, for as far as I saw, they were at least a conference final team, right? Yeah, they didn't make it there, but they were good enough to get to the conference final, losing, of course, to Vegas, who was the eventual Stanley Cup winner. And so, why, don't make too many changes. Take those experiences that this team has and do incremental changes. And that's what's happened. If you look at Vegas, and they picked up Hurdle and Mantha, I'd take Henrique over both of those players. And Henrique is going to be our third line guy, likely. In fact, I think he was practicing in Buffalo today on the third line with Perry and Kane.
Yeah, and he played on second. Well, started the game in Columbus on the second line. So like, he's middle six, right? Like,
Middle six.
You look at his production this season. He's fifth in the Oilers in terms of points, even strength goals and goals. Like, he's a top 6 forward from a production standpoint, but he's going to be utilized in the second or third line sometimes.
And think about this. You've got Adam Henrique, 18 goal scorer, 18, and he's going to be over 20 by the time we hit the playoffs. You've got Evander Kane, who's already a 20-plus goal scorer, right? This is your third line, right? Like, this is your third line. These are the two on your third line, and add in Corey Perry, who is a known playoff performer. If that's my third line, I'm pretty excited about that going into the playoffs.
Now, how many years have we been saying that we needed to add a third line center that can score at the
Well,
deadline? Yeah,
we
we got Nicky Bukestad last year, and that was helpful. This year, if Henrique ends up playing third line, then that's a bigger upgrade than what we had with Nick Bukestad last year.
and the Oilers are going to that's what they're going to go with, right? So you've got and if they, the I watched both panels today. Nobody was saying the Oilers are out of it. Everybody talked about the how much Vegas obviously improved on their lineup. There's a lot of question marks still, though, on whether or not, right? Like, do Stone and Martinez come back? Assuming they do, then they're a good team, no doubt. But I'm having trouble with that section of Oilers fans that don't think having Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Adam Henrique as your top three centers is not enough to get you through to the final,
Not to
right?
mention
Like,
having Nugent Hopkins and Ryan McLeod as other center
yeah, and
options as well.
yeah, and so you don't have that, and then like we've still got the Viking on defense. We've still got Evan Bouchard, who is a top offensive defenseman in the league. Darnell Nurse, who has been anything like he's been great this year because he's being utilized properly, right? I still think like Oilers fans, they think about contract before they think about how how the players utilized in the lineup. Darnell Nurse is great. Like he's a top four, if not a top two defenseman on any team in the league, right?
Yep.
Desharnais played, I think, really great. He's starting to learn. Kulak and Ceci actually have been I think that's been a decent pairing for a third line D. And you're not getting to the Stanley Cup based on your third line D pairing. I'll tell you that, right?
Yeah.
Like, and for those of you that think you are, right? Like you're just not watching enough hockey, right? Like between Ekholm and Bouchard and Nurse and probably Desharnais, and that seems to be working right now. I mean, it's still too early to tell, but if that works, then the Oilers D are fine. What happened and what people pointed out, and I listened to that particular section of the TSN panel. I know it was the Sportsnet panel. Ah, crap! It's all meshing together now. It was the TSN panel, and I think it was. Geez, I'm trying to remember who it was, but they started to talk about how, and this comes up all the time. So that section of fans, they talk about Nurse and CC just getting beat up year over year in the playoffs, right? Against which they neglect to mention, against in both times the cup winning team,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So, there's going to be, it doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter. Somebody was getting beat up, right? Florida got beat up by Vegas last year, right? Like they got absolutely trounced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
injuries played a role in that, but you could argue that injuries played a role in the Oilers series as well. Evander Kane wasn't
Wow.
100%, and McDavid wasn't 100%. There was a Nuge just fell off the map. Hyman fell off the maps. Like the Oilers were certainly not at 100% in that series.
And now they've got the experience. They're getting more and more experience. This is how teams develop, right? People talk about not doing enough while McDavid is on the team. Well, Ovechkin took how many years to win a cup? McKinnon took how many years to win a cup? Right? Like these things don't happen overnight.
I
You
think
need to
people
kind of
expect there
keep going back and back and back and do incremental changes. And the Oilers have done that. And this is kind of the first year where I look at this third line and I think Kane, Henrique, and Perry. Like we saw it last night with Perry, and granted it was a loss, but we saw Perry starting to get under people's skin.
Oh yeah,
Right?
oh yeah.
Yeah, he's getting playoff ready, right? Like he's starting to we're starting to see more and more of the Corey Perry that we hate, but now we love, right? Like Oilers fans hate that guy. I think some of us still have a little bit of PTSD when we see him on the ice, but now he's on our side, thankfully.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, at the end of the day, we've got this lineup. Everybody on both panels, so they weren't counting Edmonton out. Bruce Boudreau said this is a third round team. And he might know a thing or two about hockey. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Like and he didn't even hesitate. That was the first thing out of his mouth. Who was it? Bob says, I think earlier, Vegas made the most moves this season for a team that gets eliminated in the first round. That's what they did.
Tell you, someone big is going out of the first round in the Western or in the Pacific Division, right? Whether it's Vancouver, Edmonton, or Vegas, or even LA, like two of those top four teams are going to play each other, right? And the other two might play each other in the other series because one of them is going to be a wild card team.
Well, and that's exactly it. I want to talk about this because Induced Comics. This is on YouTube. Comment on YouTube. Who knows about the chemistry with Vegas with so many new players? Like that's not talked about enough.
Ken Holland was very sure to point out that fact on his side as well. He didn't want to do anything to disrupt the chemistry, but he also wanted to add something to the team that has gotten them to this place over the course of 60 games. Like they've had a good season, rough start, especially considering the rough start. They've had a really good season. So yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And you look at the teams, and I've only gone back a few years. I was actually thinking about doing an article, believe it or not.
You?
No. I know. I don't. Once in a while, I write something. And I was going to look at Stanley Cup winning teams and what they did at the deadline.
I think I did a similar piece last year.
Did you? Yeah, and it's as far back as I got. Like it's a rarity that they make a lot of moves at the deadline.
It's because and teams that make the biggest deadlines never win. It is so rare.
So anyway, that should be a thought process. Right?
I'm gonna have to repost that article I did last year.
Maybe repost it. It'll save me having to write an article. Thank you.
I'll repost it. You can look at it and then you can decide if you want to add to it.
That's right. Maybe I'll just add a paragraph or something. So Induced Comics on YouTube. Yeah. Who knows about the chemistry? And in fairness to Vegas, I mean, it's not like they made, I don't know. The reason I'm picking on Vegas is because Oilers fans are like, wow, Vegas did this, this, and this. And the reality is they added 3 players, right? They added Mantha, they added Hurdle, and they added Hannafin. And Edmonton added Carrick, some good size as we saw last night. First game as an Oilers, dropping the glove as an Oiler. Henrique, we've added Henrique, we've added Perry, and we've added Carrick, right? And Stetcher. Now Stetcher, we'll see. I mean, what
inconsequential. I like that ad. Like he's a nice sneaky little pickup for a 7D, but he's not going to see much ice.
Yeah, and if he does, I think you can trust that he'll fill in reasonably well in the lineup. And there's still Broberg's still waiting in the wings, right? Like he's still going to be available. And then so really, I mean the big thing will be the big question mark still comes down to Stone and Martinez and whether they return in time for playoffs. Stone could be. I mean, the way they talk about the injury, he could be gone. He could be out for the.
Yeah, I don't think Stone will be back for game 1 like everyone thinks. Like everyone thinks it's a conspiracy theory. He'll be back for game 1 in the playoffs like he is every year. But this time with this particular injury, I think he's going to be out a little longer.
And there's the thought, and the discussion around teams that when you go into the playoffs, you want to be, you want to be playing your absolute best. Granted, we're still 20 games away, right? But if the Knights continue down this path, they might, well, they might not even be in the playoffs,
Yeah,
right?
they got to get there.
Calgary, surprisingly, and I hate it, but Calgary, I'll just say this, and it drives me nuts. And I'm going to say this, might be the hardest working team in the NHL right now. What they lack in talent, they sure provide in just you know just and I guess when you're not playing for anything, or when there's no pressure, maybe that's a little bit easier. I mean, we've seen Oilers teams in years past, through the decade of darkness, and that last 20 games seem, I remember thinking, oh, if they'd only played like this for the first 60, then
Then
but when
maybe.
you're not, but when the pressure's off and other teams are thinking about other things, sometimes that changes. But Calgary has, of late, been giant killers. Maybe not giants, but well, I mean the Edmonton win was huge, obviously, not to be taken lightly. They're only 6 points back in a game in hand on Vegas, so it
Oh,
can be
they
done.
they won 5 in a row recently. Is that right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, they're 6-4-0 in their last 10.
six
So
four 0 in their last 10. But like you think about all the guys that they've gotten rid of in the past calendar year that just didn't want to be there, right? Like Elias Lindholm's gone, Noah Hannafin's gone, Tyler Toffoli's gone, and you go back and even the last 2 years with Hubert or with Kachuk and Goudreau, right? That's a lot of toxicity that's out of the room now. That's a lot of guys that didn't want to be there that are now gone. So there's probably a sense of relief, and there's like a weight out of that dressing room. Markstrom's still a little frustrated about his lot in life there, but what happened with the near deal with the Devils, how that got out, and then it got changed because ownership stepped in and said no to it, which I think is dumb on their part, but that's another
yeah,
conversation for another time. But yeah, there's something to be said for that, though. A little lighter mood in the room, start feet get a little lighter, things start to happen for you.
yeah, yeah, and hey, they've got a shot, right? They've got a shot. The Kraken too are right there. They're either of those teams, right? Kraken are 7-2-1 in their last 10, and they just signed Eberle for 2 years.
Yeah, they only lost Wenberg at the trade deadline, which I like Wenberg, but not the Stanley Cup difference maker that that some other teams may have gotten at the deadline here. So well, Seattle could still make a push. You never know.
And the one part that I think is key when I'm watching all of these, folks, and kind of getting a feel for what everybody thinks about how Edmonton did is, like Craig Button said, as long as this Oilers team sticks to the structure, they're on defense, they're fine, right? Like they're good. Um, and we saw that there was right after the All-Star break, for whatever reason, it's like everybody forgot how to play in the structure. Maybe they'd all been drinking too much or partying too much or spring breaking too much, whatever it was. And they came back and they, laid a few eggs, right? High danger chances went back up to where they were at the beginning of the season. But then they got back to the structure, and we just held Boston to a single goal, right? Like that's not bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah,
Yeah,
that was the thing I had noticed that was wrong with the team all through February. They just abandoned their structure. They weren't playing connected hockey. They weren't prioritizing covering the slot in the D zone. They were just struggling. But they seem to have recovered from that for the most part. Last night,
yeah. I mean,
granted.
they lose one last night, which, I think, hey, you're on the road, things happen. Columbus has been playing well of late as well. They
Yeah,
seem to
that's
be on
hockey
the
over an 82
yeah,
game season. You're going to lose the odd game you think you should win.
yeah. Some stranger asks, "What do you guys think of the Jets? They've added more firepower." I was gonna. It's a good transition because I was gonna say, and ask what you thought in terms of who did the best over trade deadline. like who improved the most over trade deadline. And while I'm not a big Toffoli fan, in my mind, the team that's improved since, not including just today, but if you include the Monahan trade, I think the Jets probably because they already had goaltending, right? So I'd say, they, in my mind, at least, improved probably the most because they needed to, and they got Monahan, who's had some success. He looks good on the Jets. Adding to Foley, who's whether you like him or hate him,
This
he's
guy can
he can
score.
score goals, right?
Yep.
And he's been there. He's won a cup, right? So he's got experience. What's your thought on the Jets, and then who came out of the trade deadline looking maybe the most improved?
Yeah, I like what the Jets did with Toffoli. I mean, Monahan's worked out really good for them too. Toffoli is the one winger that the Oilers may have had a potential chance at getting that I wish they would have made more of a play for, just because he's a right-hand shot, pure right winger, can score, like check, check, check. That's kind of what we were hoping we would get in the top six. But that's a good pickup for Winnipeg. But another team I'd look to in the Central Division that improved a lot is Colorado. They took a prospect and Bowen Byram, who I really like, and they used him to fill a need at 2C with Casey Middlestat, who was better than I originally gave him credit for. I didn't realize he had broken out the way he did last year and this year. So he's a legitimate 2C for Colorado. Then Colorado also went out and got Yakov Trenin from Nashville, and they added Duhaime from Minnesota as well. It's like their bottom six got bigger, stronger, meaner, faster, all that. And they added that second line scoring that they needed. They got rid of Ryan Johansson, who was a little bit of dead weight. And they added Sean Walker to replace Bowen Byram. Right. So, like, my criticism of Colorado is that their D is small, but they are quick and they move the puck quickly. So that I think Colorado did pretty well.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that, right? Like they did well, at least on paper, they did well. Some of it, the other day I thought was a little bit of moving the deck chairs. Middlestat's one of those guys who in Edmonton would be the first guy they'd start the bus for, though, right? Like he kind of, I mean, I'll give him some credit, hell of a player, but always talked about potential, right, in Buffalo.
Yeah, and like it took him a while to get going, and he's been at about a half a point a game for the last 2 seasons prior to last season even, but he only played half the year. So I think his breaking out was a little under the radar, and it fooled me. Like I say, up until yesterday, I wasn't really aware that he had broken out, right? But high skill player, high draft pick, but yeah, he's not known.
Yeah, I think 8th overall, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Looking 8th pick, 2017 already. Yeah. I mean, he's over a half point a game for sure. Buffalo is one of those teams that I follow. Maybe partly because of Jeff Ade, partly because I followed them actually before I knew Jeff Ade was a Sabres fan. I think there's just like, if there was a sister team to the Oilers, that would have been it, right? Yeah. A city that nobody really wanted to play in, and then the darkness, the times of darkness. Buffalo's got it worse than Edmonton does. I mean, this is quite the stretch, and every year you think it's going to be the year. They did add Bowen Byram. Which is huge because their decor is going to be absolutely phenomenal if they can keep them all together.
Darlene Power and Bowen Byram on the left side. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. So riches in that regard. But Middlestat is interesting in that, watching him keeping up with, the Sabres. Like, they're just, there were times where, kind of like a Fogel, right? Like, there are times where you love Fogel and he's absolutely a beast. And then times where you just like, come on, man, like
Then
do
you go
something,
16 games
right?
without a goal,
Yeah,
and you're like, "Come on, man."
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the game logs for Middlestat, and maybe I'll do that. But he's got that kind of streakiness to him, where he scores in bunches, or has had in years past. I haven't watched Buffalo as much this year because I'm more out of disappointment. I thought this was going to be the year that they would bridge the gap, but they clearly they're not going to do that this year. But anyway, he slots in, I think, in the second line for Colorado.
Yeah, definitely.
And needed. I just don't know that he's going to be enough, right? Like this team, it just seems to me like they're still maybe missing, like, if you take the Oilers, for instance, right? Like that's, whether fans realize it or not, like that's a hell of a forward core that we have, right? Like
It is.
you, I mean, like riches, unbelievable riches in our forwards, right? Just McDavid and Draisaitl alone. You could build pretty much any team around that, and you'd still have a good forward core, right?
And let's not forget 40 goal scorer Zach Hyman this year.
Yeah, Zach Hyman. Like that's two of the top 10 goal scorers in the league. I think Draisaitl's now sitting at 11th, but he was in 10th for a little bit. Two
Yeah,
of the top 10
and Leon,
goal scorers in the
right?
league.
Like,
Yeah,
how
yeah,
crazy is that to say? 2 of the top 10 scorers in the league and Leon Draisaitl.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is unbelievable, right? Like it's just if the Oilers had a year, this is their year. I still think they're good enough. I think they've done enough to get past the hump. Now, the question was asked on the Sportsnet panel, which is going to be in the NHL the hardest division to come out of?
That's a tough call, but like I'm leaning Pacific, honestly. Like I think with just the Canucks being as good as they are this year, like they're going to be a really tough out. I think Vegas loading up the way that they did, and like if they get a little bit healthier, then they're still going to be a really tough out. The Oilers are real strong. The Kings are a thorn in our side. I think we're better than the Kings, but just the style of hockey they play, and they have just enough talent to make you think twice. And Quentin Byfield has emerged this year for them. So the Kings are certainly no slouch. So I think there's 4 really good teams in the Pacific that are going to go head to head.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's that was kind of my thought, and the other side of this is maybe the Central, right? Like we just talked about Colorado and Winnipeg.
Dallas.
Dallas, of course, made a couple good moves, adding Tanev's no no small thing if he stays healthy, right?
Yep.
All big things. But it was interesting because a lot of folks jumped on the Central right away when the question was asked, and then Bieksa said, "Well, I think it's the Pacific, guys," and Bx is convincing on that Sportsnet panel, and everybody started to kind of think maybe the other way and said, "Well, this Pacific's going to be pretty tough." And you have, Vancouver is the clear leader right now in the Western Conference, right? Like they're still, even though they're in a bit of a slump, right? Although they've won 3 in a row.
And they're about to start a
Uh,
9-game homestand.
yeah. Oh, there, Bob the goalie says Middlestat just came off a pointless streak of 5 games and 6 points in a 15-game stretch. So there you have it. I told you. I knew. See, once in a while I know what I'm talking about. Thanks, Bob, for confirming that I'm not crazy. Well, actually, that doesn't confirm
Yeah, I
anything.
was going to say, I don't know if that confirms that.
Let's not get carried away. All right, so you Pacific. I'm going to side with you on that, but let's the Western Conference this year seems to me again to be the favorite for having the Stanley Cup winner come out of the Western Conference, and it's not going to be easy. Like I love Edmonton's chances, but there's not going to be any walk in the park this year, like there is any year. Like the Stanley Cup is unbelievably hard to win.
Like in the
Oh,
West,
really?
I mean, the first round, right? There's usually two or three teams where you're like, okay, you guys are out in the first round. Like, what are you even doing here, right? But I don't think that's the case in the Western Conference this year. You might have one team where it's like that, and that team might be Nashville with UC Saros. So they could, you never know. Hot goalie can change a lot of things in a series. I think the Atlantic is another one that's kind of going to be tough too. Like Florida doing what they're doing, and then adding Tarasenko and Okposo today. I think they're going to be a tough out. Like Boston's always a tough out. And then you got the Leafs, who I mean they're the Leafs, but they're still a good hockey team.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a good hockey team, and they improved marginally over the trade deadline.
I didn't love their D acquisitions. Like they needed warm bodies, and I think that's what they got.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Labushkin, I'm not sure.
They have him on their top pairing right now. Like that's
Yeah,
just not going to cut it. And then
yeah,
Edmondson, yeah, he does some good things out there, but he's on the slow side.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not. I don't think that I don't have the Leafs, and not because they're the Leafs, but I don't have them making a big splash in the playoffs this year. Much to Toronto fans' dismay. If I had to guess out of the East as it looks today, either Florida again or Carolina would be my two picks. In Boston, I mean, it's hard to count out Boston, even though last year was a disappointment. They're a hell of a team, as we saw the other night. They're a hell of a team.
It's one of those
Somebody
weird
did joke, just
situations.
take
Like,
them to overtime all the time.
they just play good hockey and they have a winning culture there, right?
Yeah.
Like last year, they did what they did, historic regular season, and then out in the first round. But then watch, they lose Bergeron and Krejci, and then they go on a tear and win it all this year. You never know, right? Like life works like that sometimes. You load up and things all look in your favor, and then life pulls the carpet out from underneath you, and suddenly it's not looking so good.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody had the playoffs figured out, right, like we'd have more, 2 and 3 peats than we do, right?
Yep.
It's a tough. It's in my mind, and I don't think I'm wrong. It's the toughest championship to win in sport. Like everybody is injured by the time they get to the end, right? Like it is, it's absolutely a team game. This is not like the NBA where you can have, 2 or 3 really good players drive the whole whole team throughout playoffs, right? This is, you need a roster that, the whole roster and a couple more. You need a couple of depth guys that'll come in. Look at Vegas last year. You need an Aiden Hill to come in and play stellar goaltending, right? Seemingly out of nowhere. Obviously, they knew what they had, but they traded for Quick at the deadline last year, right?
Yeah. And then
And
didn't use them, but they had them
yeah,
just in case.
yeah, and in most cases, if you were to go to your backup, you're not going anywhere in the playoffs. In fact, the panel on TSN, the goaltending panel, was talking about that, and they got to talking about Edmonton. Like, does Edmonton need to? And we've heard that. We heard that in the heavy hockey chat today. As Oilers failed because they didn't shore up the goaltending. Well, the general consensus was you don't win with your backup anyway, right? Like, do the Tampa Bay Lightning, who was it said, would the Tampa Bay Lightning have won with Brian Elliott in net? Right? Probably not, right? Vasilevsky's the guy. And so the consensus was, and not, and they said this there too, is not comparing Vasilevsky to Skinner by any means, but
No.
you either win with Skinner or you don't win at all, right?
Yeah, most
And
teams. I mean, you can look back in history and look at a few examples like Cam Ward in '06, Matt Murray with the Penguins. Like those are examples of backups going in and winning it all with their teams. But that is far from the the case most of the time. Michael Leighton in 2010 with Philadelphia almost got the job done, but
yeah,
not quite. uh, Oilers in '06, you lose your Olsen in the Cup Finals, and suddenly you're looking at Ty Conklin and UC Markkinen.
yeah, absolutely, right. And so you have to Skinner's your guy, so he goes. And look, we still have Jack Campbell who can
Yeah,
come up and
exactly.
play.
Like Campbell's been playing pretty good in the AHL recently. So yeah, awful start to the year. I don't know where his head was at, but it was not in the right place.
Yeah.
But he seems to be playing better now, and he gave us some good minutes in the playoffs last year. And I, I
I
don't
mean,
expect.
good enough that people complain that the Oilers should have started him,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So clearly, he has it within himself to play well enough to win some hockey games for this squad. All right, we're going to shut it down. Pretty good audience today, not tonight. Used to doing this in the evening. This was a special edition heavy hockey trade deadline discussion. It was more, I think, my way of saying to all the negative Oilers fans out there, sit tight because it's going to be a good playoffs, I think, for these Oilers.
And
Yeah.
I mean, some people are just never going to be happy. Like they want to see the Oilers with 0 draft picks and 0 cents of cap space remaining. Like right now, we've we've already utilized pretty much half of the 2025 picks. We've spent picks in 26 and 27. Or well, sorry, it's a conditional pick in 26, right?
Yeah.
Like, and our prospect cupboard is pretty bare at the moment. So like, I'm not too concerned about the all-in mentality. Like Holland has bought it every single deadline that he's been here, and we're going to pay a price for it in the next handful of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree the Oilers need to be all in, but I think they have been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You spent your
Yeah.
first rounder. You got a top 6 forward. Maybe not the player you wanted, but you got a top 6 forward, and you rounded out your depth.
And not everybody's available to you,
Not
right?
everybody's available.
Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
loved to have seen Eberle come here. Like I was
Yeah.
cheering for it. I would have loved it, but he resigned.
Some
He
people
wasn't
wanted
the choice.
Tarasenko, but I
He
think
wasn't
the
the
word
choice.
was that Tarasenko wanted to play in Philadelphia or in
If you
Florida,
heard my
right? Yeah.
episode with Eric Friesen on 99
Yeah.
Forever, Tarasenko was my number 1 choice, but
Yeah.
he didn't want to come here, so nothing we can do
That's right.
about that.
And we know about that. We know the Healy thing or Healy, the heel Heatley. I mean, these things happen, right? Like guys don't want to play certain places. And now with the no move clauses and that's what happens. The Oilers got what they had available. They made moves on, as talked about. They were making a move on Eberle. They asked, they see what was available, right? In some of these deals required a third party,
Yeah,
as a
which
broker,
Holland did.
right?
They needed
Yeah.
a third party to get the Henrik deal done.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, I will, ultimately, the end result will be whether, the Oilers win a cup or not. And that's how you'll be graded. But I think this team's good enough to do it. I think there's still some question marks with Vegas in terms of injury, whether or not they even make the playoffs, right? And then, Vegas and LA didn't do much. I don't think they had to. I like, doing something at the trade deadline must mean that you're, missing something, right? Like, Maybe, we always talk about being buyers at the trade deadline. But if your team got you there and you're in the top, 5 teams in the league, don't do too much, right? Don't do too much because you have to you have to keep that squad that got you there. That's what's going to get you to the finals. And the teams that have won the cup, Lotsy's going to reshare his article.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Brian Burke always says one team wins the Stanley Cup and all the others overpay at the deadline.
I always loved Burke's comment about that. Yeah, he never understood that. So no, it was good. All right. I'm going to give you the last word and for once let you speak. Yeah, I'll give you the last word today, this afternoon, and thanks for joining me, Ryan. We'll be back. Next show will be Wednesday, 5 p.m. Mountain on here, Edmonton Sports Talk, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, all of those places with Oilerslive. And then I think we're going to do another Tough Call podcast, which was a lot of fun. I don't know if you watched it last night.
I caught a little bit of it. Yep.
Yeah, Josh, that was fun. And then, at some point in my life, I'll get some sleep.
It's overrated. Sleep's for the week.
Sleep is for the week. Yeah, but thank you so much. We had a great audience tonight across Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Ryan, last word, and we'll call it a night.
And just to kind of recap some of the things we talked about, I mean, Ken Holland was about as all in as he could possibly get. He didn't get the scoring right winger that we all wanted so much, but he was in on Eberle. I think Eberle would have come here if he didn't resign. And Toffoli is the only other real right winger that I would have wanted, but I wouldn't have wanted to pay more than the second and the third that Winnipeg gave up, and we would have had to give up more for 75% retention, and we would have had to give up a contract to fit him in, even with 3/4 retention. So it's okay that we didn't get that. I'm happy to let Vegas have Mantha. I don't mind them having that player at all. So I think we did pretty good up front getting Henrique and Carrick, and then having added Perry already. I think that's pretty good. Yes, Walker and Carrier were upgrades over CC, and so is Tanev. We tried to get Tanev. We offered a superior offer for Tanev. Didn't happen. Calgary didn't want it. That's fine. Carrier didn't get moved. He would have been an upgrade over CC, but he wasn't available. Okay. Sean Walker got moved and marginal upgrade over CC at best, and we wouldn't have been able to re-sign him. We might not be able to re-sign Henrique either, but I think you're getting more of an upgrade to your roster with Henrique than you would have got with Walker. So I think that Ken Holland did a pretty good job, all things considered. And this is a Stanley Cup contending team, even with Cody Ceci on defense, and even without Eberle or Tyler Toffoli on the right wing. This is a Stanley Cup contender. So we'll let it play out. We'll see how it goes. But this trade deadline does not get an F, in my opinion, from Ken Holland. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And check out my trade deadline wrap on heavyhockey.com, and we'll have more content in the coming days. But for now, peace out. Have a good night. Thanks for watching.